Welcome back, baseball fans, to the 1979-82 Fall League Draft. We have third round results for you. Draft's moving along really nicely. Toronto, they took Rod Carew and Dean Fiore in the first two rounds. In the third round, we did an improvement. That means we already have a player, but we find a better year. And the guy we improved was this guy, Damaso Garcia. He was a 250 hitter and a 2 and a C stealer, and everything got a lot better for Damaso in 1982. One of his best years with the Blue Jays. And the Blue Jays are doing some smart stuff in this draft, folks. They are trying to make a dent in that American League East, dominated by the Orioles, Red Sox, and Yankees. So not a bad improvement at all for Toronto. Next up, the White Sox are on the clock. And the White Sox, well, it's not a flashy pick, but it's an effective one. They traded for Dennis Lamp in the offseason, and they picked him in his 1981 season. And I believe was he a White Sox? Yeah, he was for them. And he had a fine year. And he's also a starter 8. So behind the two lefties, Burns and Kravick, they'll have Dennis Lamp. So that's a nice start to a pitching rotation for the White Sox. It's good news for them. Next up, Arizona Diamondbacks. So they picked the year of 1980, and they selected two guys. And why I say they select two guys is they have the rights to two guys. So in 1980 would be their third round pick. The other year for 1980 is the seventh round. So it's a third and seventh round picks. And the two guys were Bob Ebony Eyes Welch, was a Dodger, joining Valenzuela and Stone in that rotation. And the other player from 1980 was Chris Spire, playing shortstop. Nice year for him with the Expos. So, solid team. Solid Arizona team. They don't look like an expansion team. They look like they're ready to go, compete with the big boys. Ohio players, they took a couple guys from the 82 set. And the first was a rookie, or a guy who hadn't had his rookie status taken yet, and it was Tony Pena. So basically, they robbed the Pirates from Tony Pena. And 82 is a full-time season for Tony. So that'll help this young team. And the other thing they did was improving a player. They improved Joaquin Andujar. His 82 season would have been in the World Series, I think, for the Cardinals, if I'm not mistaken. So they have Mike Norris's best year, Andujar, Vita Blue. Yeah, they have a nice pitching staff. Picking fifth, the Padres. All right, they took rookies Frazier and LaFay last time. They went back to keepers from the year of 1980 and took a couple Hall of Famers, believe it or not. Hall of Famer and either or, they had the rights to both. They took Ozzie Smith. So here he is still a Padre. And the Padres want to hold on to him as long as they can. They don't want to give him to the Cardinals quite yet. Not much bat, but a double-A stealer. And in the back of the bullpen, one more go-around for Raleigh Fingers. They don't want to let him go to Milwaukee. It's funny, but Fingers and Ozzie Smith would probably play against each other in the 1982 World Series for the Brewers and Cardinals. They're currently still sticking with the Padres for 2 more years, 79 and 80. Good news for the Padres. They gotta do that. And speaking of the Cardinals, they're disappointed not to have Ozzie Smith, but content to stick with Gary Templeton, which is fine. And the Cardinals actually made a trade. It was a fun little trade. They traded a draft token and the rights to Cesar Geronimo, a declining player. And they traded for and acquired from the White Sox George Orta. George batting out of Orta, now in the outfield. Used to be an infielder. But Orta goes to the National League for the Cardinals. And that's a nice little addition for this team. He's decent defensively as a 3 in the outfield. He joins Willie McGee, a rookie, and Dane Orge, and they'll have to find a right-handed batter to platoon with Orge later in the draft. Nice moves for the Cardinals. The Oakland A's are next. Oakland. Well, they've been doing pitching in the first rounds. They did Keogh, and then they did Lacey and Jeff Jones. This time, they decided they did get a rookie from '82. They got a rookie from '82 and an improved player in the year of '82. The player they improved was Dwayne Murphy from his '79 season, where he was a 3. Now he's a 1 in center field. Ace stealer, plenty of power. And Henderson was playing center decently, but now he goes over to left. Murphy goes to center. And they needed a right-handed reliever, and they found this guy, Dave Beard, from 1982, was an Oakland A. So they finished their pitching staff. And what a pitching staff it is. Even without Mike Norris, they still have McCaddy in his best year, Langford and Underwood, Keogh in his best year, then Beard, a lefty Easterly, a righty Jones, and a lefty Lacey. That's a good Oakland team. They are ready. It's funny, I've literally rebuilt the early '70 Dynasty A team. They've kind of done it already. They're ready to go and compete in the American League West, where the California Angels won the division a year ago. All right, next up, the Mets. I'll take a little break here. They had a nice pick. They did all their keepers in the first 2 rounds. Those were Craig Swan, John Stearns, Doug Bear, Kevin Kubel. But then they did some clever stuff to their pitching staff in the year of 1971. So let's take a look at the pitching staff. They already had Swan. They traded for Abbott, who pitches on 3 days rest. But they picked up on waivers Frank Tanana. Nobody seemed to want Frank, and he bounced around to a few teams. He struggled with the Angels. He would pitch for Boston in '81. But why this card is so good is, in the small sample, nobody gets on versus lefties. He'd be more effective in the bullpen, where you can do matchups easier. But he joins the rotation here with Craig Swan, Glenn Abbott, and Kevin Kubel. And they improved Pete Falcone to arguably his best year of 1981. He's got a 2.56 ERA. As a relief, 3.5. He becomes your lefty setup man. And folks, the Mets can pitch. We always knew they used to, and then they slumped. Now they're back. Swan, Tanana, Abbott, Kubel, Hausman, and you have Bear, Falcone, Reardon at the back. That's great. And they still got the good offense. Still got a good DH, your catcher, first, second, third, short, Huey Brooks, Mazzilli, and the best young blood card you're going to find. So that's a pretty solid Met team. All right, we'll pause for a minute and give you another 8 group of teams. All right, the next group of 8 begins with the Colorado Rockies on the clock. Let's see, they took what year? Oh, they took the year of 1981. They did some nice stuff in this year. So they went into the year of 1981 in the 3rd round, and they found Larry McWilliams, lefty starter. A good year in Atlanta, eventually goes to the Pirates. Didn't pitch a lot of innings, but pitched them very well when he did pitch. And they improved a player, and it was Terry Kennedy. Steady progress from 79, 80 to 81, and now he's a 300 hitting catcher. And funny thing is, I think he'll DH, because you have Joe Ferguson. These guys are both full-time catchers in theory. But one could be a DH, one could be a catcher, and you have your backup catcher at the same time. So, yeah, smart move for Colorado. Improving Terry Kennedy to make him an everyday player. All right, the Red Sox. Only one move to make. So in the first couple rounds, they of course got Jim Rice, Carlton Fisk, Dennis Eckersley. And they decided to go into the year of '82, the rookie year. And they really need a left-handed hitting third baseman to help this team. That's their only weakness. So let's see if they found a left-handed hitting third. Oh, here he is. Let's see if this guy's any good. They need a left-handed hitting third baseman. Well, here's this guy named Wade Boggs. And yeah, he can play third. And he does okay. In his rookie year, he's only hitting .349. But that's good enough. That's good enough to play some third base for the Red Sox. You know, the most perfect fit. And oddly, poor Wade Boggs has to wait to the 3rd round of this draft because of Jim Rice and Carlton Fisk and seniority and stuff like that. All right, the Giants. Nothing fancy here for the Giants. Yeah, they did a couple moves. One move was they didn't have any catchers at all, and in the year of '79 they went for the best catcher available, and they found Steve Yeager. So one thing about this is that it messes up with the Dodgers, a division rival. So that's a feather in the Giants' cap for doing that. He's a minus 2 arm catcher, but it's really all on the left side. Over here, it's pretty bad, pretty awful, which is why he's just a 216 hitter. Percentages, you know, imbalanced. You have a guy who crushes lefties. Now you just got to get yourself any catcher. You don't even have to worry about an arm. Just find a catcher who can hit 260 against righties. Their other player they took from 79 is Terry Whitfield. He's like a 290, 300 hitter, 287. Good enough. He was a Giant as well, so nothing flashy from the year of 79. They didn't have a lot of good candidates from that year. Some years are better than others. Cincinnati's Big Red Machine. This is another just ordinary pick, but it's more clever than you think. In 81, they went outside of the organization and found a guy on waivers. He actually played for the Cubs last year. Actually, it's Dave McKay. Now, Dave McKay was actually an Oakland player in 81. And he hits a respectable 263 with some walks. And he's a 2 at 2 different positions. And, you know, they just don't, in the timeline, they don't have Ray Knight or Pete Rose anymore. So they're looking for a third baseman, and none were available. So they went with a guy who's actually, that's not bad to have a 2 third baseman who gets on base, and you also have this guy Garth Orge with power against left-handed pitching. So it's an average platoon, but it's not awful, you know. And Cincinnati does all their damage elsewhere in this lineup, you know. So, and of course they got great pitching. So certainly nothing flashy at all about that pick until you dig a little deeper and see that McKay can help you in a couple different ways. The Texas Rangers. Okay, they went into the year of 1980, and they had a couple keepers from 80, both pitchers, and they took them both. Teammates from 80, and there they are: John Matlack, Doc Medich. So of course Matlack is a 3rd round pick, and Medich will be a 7th round pick. Announced now, like I said before. So you got your 4-man rotation with 1 lefty in it, and you have 2 lefties in your bullpen. So all you need is a right-handed reliever. That's the easiest thing to find. So Texas is in good shape. Good shape for Texas. Florida Marlins. What did they do? Oh, they did solid picks again. I think in the 3rd round, if a team is seeing they have 2 keepers in the same year, they seem to jump on that to get that roster filled up so they don't have holes. The year of 1980, they took Richie Hebner and Vern Rule, both keepers. So here's Hebner. He'll play 3rd base with his 80 card. Guerrero was, frankly, at 2nd. Hebner at 3rd. The defense is terrible, but it's Florida, and they're willing to deal with bad defense. Vern Rule actually has to go to the bullpen, even though he's a starter 7, because Barrios is a starter 7, doesn't relief. Technically David Palmer could go into the bullpen. He's also a starter 7. Schatzeder and Rick Wise. So plenty of decent pitching for Florida. Your Twinks, your Minnesota Twins. Nothing's flashy here. They went into the year of 81. They found 1 guy, and they only selected the 1 guy because they weren't sure. They thought they would just wait and see. Sometimes you want to just, you know, don't overdraft this thing and be in a hurry, because there could be a diamond falling to you, and you don't want to draft a guy and he's not really that good. But they added another starting pitcher, Larry Sorensen, acquired in the offseason. His 81 season, I think, was a Cardinal. Yeah, he was. He will join the 2 lefties at the top, Kuzman, Zahn, Sorensen, and Arroyo. But this team's pitching staff is done because they got a devastating bullpen: Corbett, Johnson, Marshall, and Goltz. So they locked up the pitching staff. They don't have to worry about pitching anymore. Smart thing to do, really, because you only have 8 pitchers, you have 12 hitters, and most of the time your 10th, 11th, and 12th hitters are just reserves anyway. They're not that important. So get those pitchers when you can. Seattle. Oh, this is a clever move. Again, teams, if they don't have the 2 keepers, they're kind of like lost at this point. And Seattle said, let's go to the year 1980. Instead of using a keeper, let's find a left-handed starter because left-handed pitching is starting to become thin. That's an important point in this draft. We're only in the 3rd round, and lefties are hard to come by. So they found a guy, and he was the first player on the retired list who could have been put on waivers, and it's this guy, Darrell Jackson. Let's get a better look at the card with the original 80 card that they printed out. So he was put on the retired list, and he probably should have been put on the waivered list because he's still a decent player. So they searched high and low on the left-handed pitchers who were put on waivers. And once Frank Tanana left the board and Rick Honeycutt left the board and some others, the well ran dry. So they were the first team to go into the retired pool of players, and they found this guy. That's a nice player to get, Darrell Jackson. And they only have to, I think, let's see, they got Bannister. Oh, I need to get one more, though. They have Bannister, and Jackson, so they need one more lefty. Well, at least they didn't get screwed and have to have 2 terrible ones. So, Jackson helps out a lot. Let's take a break, and we'll give you another 8 teams. All right, next up is the Houston Astros. And they went into the year of 81, which seems to be a pretty popular year now in this particular round. In 81, Ken Forsch has his best year in the timeline, so he was their first pick. And it's a good Ken Forsch card in 81. There were some great pitching performances in the year of the strike. Hitting was down except for the fringe players, but a great year for Forsch. And believe it or not, they also have J.R. Richard, Joe Negro, and they need to get themselves a lefty starter, as they'll have Sambito and hopefully Capillas in the bullpen. They need to find themselves a lefty starter. We just showed you how difficult that could be with Seattle. And they also added from the year of 81, because they had his rights, Alan Ashby. So they already had Harry Spillman, who can catch, but he's more of a utility DH type, and he's better at first base. So he now goes to first base DH, platooning with Manny Mota. Ashby's like a full-time catcher. Watson's a full-time first base, except Spillman will play first, and Watson will be the designated hitter. You can almost look at it like this and say Watson's your full-time DH, full-time catcher, and Spillman and Mota can platoon at DH with Watson. Sort of how you look at that. Of course, Mota goes to DH exclusively. The Tigers. All right, the Tigers in 81. A couple nice moves to their pitching staff. They did an improvement. So Jack Morris hadn't pitched 200 innings yet in his career. Now he does, or theoretically he could. I don't think he does. 198, but it was the year of the strike. But yeah, he pitches on 3 days rest. It's the year of the strike, so his innings are way up there. Great year in 81 for Jack Morris. And they also added from that same season Dave Rozema, who is as a relief starter, he's better off being in the bullpen now than is starting. And he's pretty solid. Doesn't walk any guys and doesn't put a lot of guys on base. So they now have a pretty nice staff. Morris, Wilcox, Underwood, and Rozema, Hiller, and Lopez in the bullpen. All right, the Phillies. This is a World Series team in 80, of course, and 81 they're in the playoffs. The Phillies, they did the 79 and 82 guys. Okay, so they do the 81 guys here. They have one more keeper left and a rookie from 81. Let's start with the rookie. Again, Ray Searage. You'll see teams, you're thinking maybe they're overdrafting lefties, but there's a shortage, folks. So Ray Searage becomes a 3rd round pick because he throws left-handed out of the bullpen, and actually he's pretty darn good in 81. And then, of course, their last keeper was Gary Maddox in the year of 81. They had the rights to him. So Searage is a 3rd round pick, and Maddox becomes a 6th round pick. Smart move, Phillies. Get your lefties now, folks. Call Santa. Tell Santa to send you some left-handed pitching. The Expos are on the clock. What do? No-brainer here. They went into 1980 because they noticed they have 2 keepers in that year. One's a hitter, one's a pitcher. So the second choice is Cromartie. He goes into the outfield as a 3 defensive player, hit 288, joining Dawson and Raines. But the 3rd round pick is Steve Rogers, the best pitcher. Let's take a better look at his 80 card from the original. That's what the original 80 card looks like for Rogers. And you had 290 ERA and 281 innings. So they got their Rogers, you know, Rogers, Sanderson, Rudy May still there, and Bill Gullickson. And they even have 2 lefties in the pen. So they're set for pitching. The Cubs. The Cubs went into 1979. This was smart. This made the rest of the league sweat. So their first choice was a guy on waivers. It was 79 Rick Waits, a starter 7. Uh-oh, here we go again, folks. They're running for the lefties, and the Cubs did not want to be left out in the cold, even with Ken Holtzman. A starter 6, he's actually going to be in the bullpen with Dennis Kinney. So they went with Waits, and they also had the rights to Rick Russell, so they took him as well. So Russell, Kruk out the top, Waits, and all they need is a right-handed pitcher, and you can either make him a starter or a reliever, and Holtzman can go to the opposite spot. So the Cubs got crossed a big need off their list. Next up, Milwaukee. Milwaukee, the year of 79, they found they had 2 keepers in that year, and they helped the pitching staff both times. Mike Caldwell, the rights to him, so he becomes their 3rd-round pick, and then their 8th-round pick will be announced later, will be Jim Slayton. He can also pitch on 3 days rest. Great year in 79. Joining Pete Vukovich and Moose Haas in the rotation. 1 lefty, 3 righties. Smart move for Milwaukee. They have such a tremendous offense. You don't want to be awful as a pitching staff. I think, though, well, they're set because they have Bob McClure coming later in the draft. So they're going to be fine. That's sort of like the emergency light is flashing if you don't have your lefties at this point. Las Vegas. 3rd round, they found a couple guys in 79 that were keepers. The first was Chris Chambliss. We mentioned earlier about the drafting of Leon Durham. What's interesting is it's a 79 Chambliss, so it's only a 1-year deal. So next year, Leon Durham's playing center field in year 1, but he can move back to first base where he should be playing after that. So Chambliss is probably just a 1-year rental at this point, but he's still a good player. And he's very consistent this entire time, 280 and 18 home runs. And they also took Bill Castro in the bullpen. Their bullpen is complete. They have the 1 lefty and 3 righties. There's Bill Castro, 1979. And the Yankees. The Yankees. They went into 1980. One somewhat surprising pick, but he fits into the team in a nice way. So their last keeper was Bucky Dent, so they picked him, and actually this is like one of Bucky Dent's highest batting averages in 1980. Defense is pretty much the same. 262 hitter, so he's playing short. Nettles is a 3rd. Nettles is a 3rd. Dent is at short. Larry Milbourne, who they drafted earlier, will now be at 2nd. So they took this guy from 80 as well, Joe Strain. Kind of surprising pick, but when you look at what they need is a right-handed hitter against lefties. My goodness, the batting average is insane here. 2 entire columns of hits against lefties. So he's the only right-handed infielder because you have a switch hitter and lefty. Oh, I guess Dent's a righty as well. They traded Billy Smith away, I believe. Yeah, they traded Billy Smith to the Tigers for Jay Johnstone. So. All right, now we'll take a look at the last group of 8. All right, the final group of 8, beginning with the Cleveland Indians. So they went into the year of 1980, and they're really thinking to themselves, maybe we should have held on to Rick Waits. He was drafted earlier. They wanted to get a left-handed pitcher, and they couldn't find anybody. I mean, there were guys, but they didn't feel like they should draft them. They're that bad. So at least they have 2 lefties in their bullpen, but they need to get 1 left-handed starter, and who knows when that'll happen. So for the moment, they simply went and took the 1980 Dwayne Kuiper. So he'll operate in a platoon at second base as a 2E4 second baseman who can hit and run. It's about 280, 282. So Dwayne Kuiper, an Indian. Smart pick. Good defense for Dwayne. And they're going to postpone the left-handed pitcher search. Portland on the clock. What did Portland do? They went into the 1980 box with 2 guys they had keepers on. and a double play combination, actually, a unorthodox one. So it's 1980 Art Howe, good third baseman, but he's going to be playing second base this year as a 3. And his double play partner is Tom Verizor, also a 3. These guys played less than a full season. Verizor, yeah, both under 400 at-bats. But for an expansion team, that is good enough. 3s at third, second and short, and they also have Bob Horner at third. Well, they got Dave Chalk defensively to caddy for Horner defensively late in games. The Pirates. Well, you know, it's getting, the cupboard's starting to get a little bit bare now. We're only in the third round, so now you got to start digging. And the Pirates had the rights to a lefty, so they said we better just do it now. And it was Bob Ochinko, acquired in the offseason. We saw Ray Searage earlier, who would be with the Pirates. And Ochinko is kind of like Searage, very similar, in 81 with a 3.23 ERA. So he becomes the lefty setup guy for Tekulve. Again, you're better off drafting questionable lefties now instead of all-star outfielders, because there's going to be a whole bunch of those all-star outfielders available, but the number of lefties is getting rather thin. Kansas City went into the year of 79 and took just one player, their own guy, and that would be Amos Otis. No longer a 1 in center field, but still got speed and power and a nice batting average here. 295, 18 home runs. Getting up there in years, but they lost Willie Wilson in a deal with the Yankees, so they're not going to have Wilson. So they're going to run Amos Otis back in center field as long as they can. And actually, Amos probably would appreciate that. I think they kicked him out of center field and he didn't like it. He was actually worse in left field than he was in center. All right, Atlanta. They went into the year of 79 and just took one guy. And the one guy was Jerry Royster, to be originally at third base, but they said, you know what, actually, let's make him second base. So he's going to play second base, his primary position. Lenny Randall was playing second. He moves to third. He can play everywhere. Bavac will platoon with him, and Frias. Not one of the best infields you're going to find at all. One of the weaker ones. But the rest of this team is pretty darn good because you have Murphy, Matthews, Mayberry, and Burrows. So the lumber comes from the outfield, first base, and DH. Not in the infield for Atlanta. Baltimore. All right, this is pretty cool. They went to the waiver list, and the Florida Marlins put Pat Kelly on waivers, and the Orioles decided to scoop him up as their DH. They didn't have a DH yet, and they're flexible enough to add one. And Kelly was an Oriole actually in '79. Had a nice year, 288, 9 home runs. So him and the second guy was Mark Belanger. He had the rights to Belanger. So Kelly becomes a 3rd-round pick, and Belanger becomes the 8th-round pick. So Baltimore's doing Baltimore things. 2 Baltimore players. All right, the Angels. They had great success in the first 2 rounds. Reality came down to earth in the 3rd round. Not really. This is a nice player, actually. In the 3rd round, they traded for in the offseason and acquired John Curtis. Let's show you John Curtis's 80 numbers in a different way. There are his numbers. They're pretty good. He was a Padre, and that's not bad. Starter 7, that's a decent card. Again, they had the rights to him, and if this guy was put on waivers, he would have already been drafted. You've heard me talk about this plenty. So the fact that he was a keeper for the Angels, they finally punched the card for that. And last but not least, the Dodgers. And they did Dodger stuff. They went to the year of 82. That wasn't a good year for them, but they found some guys who contributed nicely to their team in the year of 82. The first pick, both pitchers. And I think they completed their pitching staff. Yes, they did. So we know they would have Sutton and Hooten they drafted with Honeycutt and Sutcliffe. But they completed their bullpen in the year of 82 by taking Dave Stewart. And he was a Dodger in 82. I think he goes from the Dodgers to the Rangers and then to the Oakland A's, maybe one other team in there, before he becomes a dominant starter. And they're going to actually put him in the bullpen as a long man. And they also have him teaming up with Terry Forster, who might actually not be with the Dodgers. Oh, he was a Dodger in 82. So the Dodgers took 2 Dodgers in the year of 82. Arguably their 4th and 7th best pitchers in that year. And Castillo and Hal in the bullpen. So that's a complete pitching staff. You see 1 lefty starter and 2 lefty relievers. That's perfect. And that's what the Dodgers do. They get perfect pitching and they couple together an offense. That's been their MO for quite some time. So that's it for the 3rd round. And this is sort of my cheat sheet for all the keepers that I've been using. I've been scratching them off, circling which years I picked them in. And with the first 3 rounds of the draft done, I know which year the 4th round pick will have to be. It's the year that hasn't been chosen yet. So this will really speed up my drafting in the 4th round. I'll know which box to look for which team. They have to take a player from this particular of the 4th years because they haven't yet. Once you've gotten a player from each of the 4 years, then the draft goes from 82, 81, 80, and 79, starting with the rookie year and working its way to the present. All right, that's it for the 3rd round draft results. Hope you're enjoying this stuff. We'll see you next time.